They called him Ezra the Ox, and the name was meant to mock. At nearly 300 pounds with a round face, crooked teeth, and a body that shook when he walked, he was considered the most worthless slave in all of Chatham County. When the beautiful heiress Victoria Ashford pointed at him during the estate sale and declared, "I'll take that grotesque one for my personal amusement," the crowd erupted in laughter. What none of them knew was that the pathetic, slow-witted field hand she just purchased for $35 was actually Elijah Freeman, a fugitive mathematics professor from Philadelphia, and he'd been hiding in plain sight for 2 years, waiting for an opportunity exactly like this. Before we reveal how the ugliest man on the plantation destroyed the cruelest woman in Georgia, smash that subscribe button. This story will change everything you think you know about revenge and justice. You won't believe how this ends. The year was 1847, and Victoria Ashford was poison wrapped in silk. At 25 years old, she had inherited Willowbrook Plantation after her elderly husband conveniently died in his sleep. Some whispered she'd helped him along. With porcelain skin, raven black hair, and eyes like blue ice, she was the most beautiful and most feared woman in Georgia society. Men desired her, women envied her, and slaves prayed to never catch her attention. Because Victoria had a sickness that wealth and beauty had only made worse, she enjoyed causing pain. Not the typical cruelty of plantation owners, the economic brutality, the casual violence, the systematic dehumanization. No, Victoria's cruelty was personal, creative, intimate. She collected human suffering the way other wealthy women collected jewelry. Her previous house pets, as she called them, had all met terrible ends. One had hanged himself in the barn. Another had run into the swamp and was never seen again. A third had simply lost her mind and now lived in the asylum in Savannah, speaking to people who weren't there. The estate sale was held on a blistering August morning. Victoria had decided she needed fresh entertainment, as she told her friends over tea. She arrived in a cream-colored dress that cost more than most families earned in a year, carrying a lace parasol, looking every inch the Southern belle. The auctioneer, a sweaty man named Tobias Crane, was selling off the slaves from the bankrupt Morrison estate. He'd been warned about Miss Ashford's particular tastes. She didn't want the strong, the beautiful, or the defiant. She wanted the broken, the pathetic, the ones nobody else would bid on. "And this here," Crane announced with barely concealed disgust, "is Ezra, field hand, 40 years old. As you can see, he ain't much to look at." Ezra stood on the platform, his massive frame hunched over as if trying to make himself smaller. His clothes were threadbare and strained across his belly. His face was round and plain, one eye slightly larger than the other, giving him a permanent look of confusion. Drool glistened at the corner of his mouth. He stared at the ground, swaying slightly, as if the effort of standing was almost too much. The crowd whispered and pointed. Some laughed outright. "Can he even work?" someone called out. "Barely," Crane admitted. "Morrison kept him because he's surprisingly strong when properly motivated with the whip. Good for heavy lifting, nothing else. Dumb as a post. Can't read, can't count past 5, can barely speak proper English. But he eats like 3 men, so he's expensive to keep. Starting bid, $20. Silence. Who would waste money on such useless property? Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking on the wooden platform. She walked around Ezra slowly, studying him like a scientist examining a specimen. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence, just stood there breathing heavily, that vacant expression never changing. "Does he understand commands?" Victoria asked. "Sometimes," Crane said. "You have to speak slow and use simple words. Repeat things a few times." Victoria smiled, a beautiful, terrible smile. "Perfect. I'll take him. $35. The crowd murmured in surprise. Victoria Ashford, one of the wealthiest women in Georgia, buying the most worthless slave at the auction. "Ma'am, are you certain?" Crane asked, confused. "I have much finer specimens available. Strong young men, educated house servants." "I said I'll take him," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "Or do you question my judgment, Mr. Crane?" "No, ma'am. Of course not, ma'am." He banged his gavel quickly. "Sold to Miss Victoria Ashford for $35. As they led Ezra away, Victoria's friend Amanda whispered, "Victoria, darling, what on earth do you want with that disgusting creature?" Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious anticipation. "You know how I tire of pretty things, Amanda. They break too easily, and everyone expects you to treat them well. But something ugly, something worthless, I can do whatever I please and no one will care. He's perfect." What Victoria didn't know, what no one in that crowd knew, was that Ezra the Ox was one of the most elaborate disguises ever created by a fugitive slave. His real name was Elijah Freeman, and 2 years ago, he'd been Professor Elijah Freeman, teaching advanced mathematics at a small college for free people of color in Philadelphia. Born free in New York to parents who'd escaped slavery, Elijah had been blessed with a brilliant mind. By age 15, he was solving mathematical problems that stumped university professors. By 25, he was published in academic journals. By 30, he was one of the most respected Negro scholars in the North. But brilliance couldn't protect him from the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. A corrupt slave catcher named Silas Drummond had discovered Elijah's parents had escaped from a Georgia plantation 35 years earlier. Under the new law, even freeborn children of escaped slaves could be claimed as property. Drummond forged documents claiming Elijah was actually a slave who'd been stolen as a child. The law was on Drummond's side. He didn't need proof, just paperwork and a sympathetic judge. Elijah had 2 choices, run or be enslaved. He chose to run. But running wasn't enough. Drummond was persistent, greedy, and well-connected. Within 6 months, Elijah realized he couldn't just hide. He needed to become someone else entirely. Someone nobody would look at twice. Someone so unremarkable, so beneath notice, that even slave catchers would pass him by. So Elijah Freeman became Ezra the Ox. He'd studied the mannerisms of people society dismissed, those with mental disabilities, physical deformities, learning difficulties. He practiced for months, the slack jaw, the unfocused gaze, the shuffling walk, the slurred speech. He gained weight deliberately, eating whatever he could find until his body transformed into something society found repulsive. He broke one of his own teeth, trained himself to drool at will, learned to control his eye muscles to create that asymmetrical, simple look. Then he'd walked into the Morrison plantation claiming to be a runaway from Alabama, deliberately getting caught, knowing they'd sell him as worthless property. He'd spent 2 years in the fields, playing his part perfectly, letting overseers beat him, enduring mockery, eating slop, sleeping in dirt, all while waiting for the right opportunity. And Victoria Ashford was exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Because Elijah hadn't just been a mathematics professor. His real passion, his secret work, had been documenting the financial networks that supported slavery. He'd spent years tracking money, which banks financed slave purchases, which businesses insured human cargo, which families built their fortunes on human bondage. And the Ashford family was at the center of one of the largest networks in the South. Victoria's late husband had been a frontman for a consortium of northern and southern investors who financed slave trading operations across 3 states. When he died, Victoria had inherited not just the plantation, but access to all his records, all his contacts, all the evidence Elijah needed to expose the entire corrupt system. Getting into Willowbrook Plantation as a trusted field hand would have been impossible, but as Victoria's pet, her toy, her source of cruel amusement, he'd have access to the house, to her private spaces, to the very documents he needed. All he had to do was endure whatever horrors she had planned and wait for his moment. The wagon ride to Willowbrook was silent, except for the driver's occasional muttered curses. Ezra sat in the back, maintaining his vacant expression, even though his mind was racing. He'd studied Victoria Ashford for months through whispered slave networks. He knew about her cruelty, her games, her need to dominate and destroy. He was betting his life that she'd underestimate him so completely that she'd never see the truth. Victoria was waiting on the front steps, changed into a simpler day dress, but still radiating that cold, cruel beauty. "Bring him inside," she commanded, "to the parlor." The parlor was exquisite. Velvet furniture, oil paintings, a piano in the corner. Completely wrong for receiving a filthy field slave, which was exactly Victoria's point. She enjoyed violating the expected order of things. "Ezra," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "do you understand me?" He nodded, letting his head bob too much, like a simpleton eager to please. "Good. Here are the rules. You belong to me now. You will live in the small room off the kitchen. You will do whatever I tell you, whenever I tell you. If you please me, you'll be fed. If you displease me, you'll be punished. Do you understand?" Another exaggerated nod. Victoria circled him, her nose wrinkling at his appearance. "You're disgusting, truly repulsive, but that's precisely why you're perfect. Tomorrow we'll begin your training." What would you do in Elijah's position right now? Comment endure if you'd play along, or fight if you'd resist. Choose. The next 3 weeks were a study in psychological torture. Victoria's training was designed to break human dignity systematically. She made Ezra perform degrading tasks, crawling on the floor while she walked on his back, eating scraps from a dog bowl, standing motionless for hours while she and her friends mocked his appearance. She would command him to dance, to sing childish songs, to play the fool for her entertainment. And Elijah endured it all, never breaking character. But while Victoria thought she was breaking him, Elijah was learning everything he needed. The layout of the house, the location of her late husband's study, the schedule of the house slaves, the times when Victoria entertained guests versus when she was alone. And he was listening. Victoria had a habit of discussing business in front of Ezra, as if he were furniture. She assumed his simple mind couldn't possibly understand or remember complex financial